Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Thecia said, it might be just a small group of us today. I know that there's a couple more people that I think are coming in later. But I am so excited to and have the privilege of introducing Dr. Teresa May, who is the director of the Harris County Community Corrections and Supervision, or Supervision and Corrections, or as we like to call it, probation, because it will always be probation to me. Dr. May has been with Harris County for at least 4 or 5 years.
9 years.
9?
Going on 10.
Wow.
I know.
Wow. Okay. Time flies. Wow. Okay. Geez. And so she's just going to give us a little update on probation and what their role is with the domestic violence folks. And then we have Yolanda Leday, who is the assistant director of the Region 3 Parole Division for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And I always think the biggest question that people have is, what's the difference between probation and parole? Probation is when you are sentenced to time that's not jail or prison, and you are being supervised out in the community, whereas parole is when you get out of the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. When you go to prison, then you're released on parole. And so I think that's always the biggest question. So I'm going to turn it over. Dr. May, I'll let you start, and we can just go from there and see how things go.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Amy. For probation, we deal with both victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. And for us, everything starts with a solid assessment. We do a full-blown risk assessment. We do screening for mental health, substance abuse, and clinical assessments for everyone, every felony case, and then any misdemeanor cases, obviously, as well, that need it, that are serious. We also do some additional evaluation of specific issues. Domestic violence would be one of those. And that's something we continue to want to work with this group and, experts around the country to hone in on even more, to make sure that we're identifying all of the high risk factors. We're particularly concerned about individuals that had weapons involved in their offense. For example, we know that that is a big predictor of a possible continued problem, or could go lethal. And patterns of behavior, those kinds of things. So that's how we start. For us, we have big volume. Our numbers are really high in terms of how many cases are coming in, every single month, and are on supervision at any given time. So one of the things that's critical to us, because we have limited resources, and frankly, because of best practice, we look carefully at cases that need to be focused on making sure we're focusing on the higher risk individuals. It's not always easy, but we do have tools that do help us with that. So our specialized caseloads are for the highest risk individuals we have. If we had all the resources in the world, we would probably expand that even more, but we don't. So the people that end up, we do have a specialized domestic violence unit, and the individuals that go into that unit are those that are at the highest risk. Score out highest, have, the most serious offenses, and, several other issues that we're very concerned about. And we're doing our best to try to keep a closer watch on those individuals and respond quicker. And that's how that works. Now, there are other domestic violence cases that have to go to a regular caseload that may be moderate or moderate high risk, just because we don't have enough resources to put them all in a specialized unit. So it's a challenge. We do, those officers, everyone, so the BIP classes are also a part of almost all of our supervision conditions. We also, during the assessment process, there are cases that will come in that don't look like a BIP case, or don't look like a domestic violence case. The charge isn't DV. It's not clear from what ever worked out in the court that it's a domestic violence situation, but there are times that we'll make a BIP recommendation when it hasn't even come up yet. And we believe that that's something that is needed. We also do the same thing with parenting classes. So it helps us a lot. The more providers make us aware of programs that are available in those situations, the more that helps us get people where they need to go. So those are really, really important things. But we also make, recommendations on other issues, which we see quite a bit, with some of, particularly our higher risk domestic violence cases. There are some that have alcohol problems. A lot of people have employment issues. Many people have attitude issues, even beyond just the DV specific stuff. Some individuals, aren't surrounded by the right kind of people. There are family problems and those sorts of things. So we try to look at these cases from a holistic perspective to make sure that we're going after all of the critical things that we know that could lead that individual to recidivate and, continue the behavior. We're not perfect, but that's where we start. And our recommendations that we make to the court on conditions are tailored around that. So there are times we do recommend BIP above and beyond. You might see it on somebody that's charged with possession of drugs. I mean, I've seen that before. Because what we saw when we looked at the cases, the police went out and the person was charged with the DV case. Maybe it didn't hold up. And the prosecutor ended up, getting them on the drugs they had in their possession. That kind of stuff. People don't realize that goes on. So what might look like simple possession, it was really a domestic violence situation. So, and I know that doesn't surprise providers and a lot of people that work in this area. So we're always looking very carefully at that. We also have, by just the nature of what we do, a lot of victims, that end up on supervision for something other than obviously DV charge. And we do a full-blown assessment on those individuals. We certainly try to identify the risk and look at, the problems and relationships they're engaged in. We're also working on whatever problems brought them to our door, whether that's substance abuse, issues with, injury to a child or a DWI, or it could be any number of things. So one of the things that's very, very helpful to us too, from the provider standpoint and the community is, making sure that we're keeping our staff up to date on what kind of resources are available for people that are victims of domestic violence, whether they're on probation or not. I didn't start my career, believe it or not, as director of a probation department. In fact, that really wasn't even the plan. I'm a trained forensic psychologist. So I started out that way and I did a lot of assessments, but I can't tell you how many times I had someone in my office doing an assessment on, and I find out they're a victim and I find out they really don't need to go home that night to the place they were left from to come see me that day. And, what I'm trying to do is get on the phone and try to get some help. Right. And sometimes, and it's always at the worst time, right? It's 5 o'clock on a Friday or, right before a holiday or whatever. But we always have had, good relationships, and we want to continue to build that with our community partners because we know y'all work around the clock as well. So more resources, especially in emergency situations and ongoing, and more education, anything you guys can provide will help us in working with victims. Amy, I don't know if I'm hitting on everything. I know we have some other things we've worked on, including, apps for victims. We do use some GPS, those kinds of things. The apps are helpful. And I know you've worked closely with my team on that. But, those are just some of the things to try to get rolling in the conversation.
I think we had a question in the chat about the communication between the BIP and the probation officer. Do they communicate, and how do they communicate?
Yes. They do. And I see this in the chronos and I hear it from some of the bit providers. So they do have to get updates, right? If somebody is court ordered to treatment, part of the bit process, and the bit providers are good about this. We need to get progress notes. We need to know if they're showing up, if they're not showing up. If they're coming in, we have to show that they're completing it. If they're not compliant, if they get kicked out, if they're not cooperating or doing well, all of that information gets documented in the probation file. And if we are at a point where we're very concerned they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and whatever that bit provider communicates to us is critical, because it may put us in a position, at a point, and I like to do this sooner rather than later. If we know there are real problems, is we want to staff that with the judge and, see if we don't need to take some action. Sometimes it's an admonishment. If the provider calls us and they're just not getting someone's not just engaging like they should, or maybe they've had, missed a few or late. And we see different rules on who gets kicked out when, those kinds of things. But the communication with the officer always helps, because that way the officer can address it with the client. And like I said, we'll take it to the judge. But yes, that's a great question. And that's critical.
And so can you kind of walk us through a little bit about the revocation process? I mean, I know it's ultimately, well, I know it, but I don't know if everyone else knows it. It's ultimately up to the judge whether or not the defendant could be revoked, his probation could be revoked. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that process, please?
Yeah, so it is a little bit complex, but here's what here's generally how we look at violations and problems with someone that's not doing well in supervision. And well, I'll talk about DV right now. So first of all, we're going to look at the seriousness of the offense, and certainly we're very concerned in a DV case because we know there's been some kind of violence, right, against another person. But we all know that those are varying degrees, right? We know we have some that are really, really high serious. I mean, it's crazy when you're trying to look at levels of seriousness. But, it could all be all the way from a Class B misdemeanor or, some kind of criminal mischief, which could be, a big problem, all the way up to a really serious offense. So we're always looking at seriousness. Then we look at risk. We look at what they scored on risk. And there are times where, individuals, the charge may not be as at a higher level, but they score high risk for us. We know there's criminality. We know there's a lot of risk factors that may keep that person continuing this behavior. So those factors are going to escalate a lot quicker, right? We're going to be more concerned about, missing an appointment, something that someone may think is not, a serious violation. We're going to be looking a lot closer at it and moving a lot quicker. The other thing is, if they're not compliant at all, the behavior is not good, we're going to be getting those cases escalated as well. So the way the revocation process starts is, we're going to do a staffing with the court. And again, I mean, the escalation depends on what's happening. Obviously, if we get a flash notice of a new offense, maybe it's the court sometimes doesn't even know. They could be in the Harris County jail. They could be in it may be in the, it was a misdemeanor court and the felony court doesn't know yet, or it could be in another county. Those go straight to court and go before a judge on that. Yes, we do use the TREX.
Yes. I don't know what TREX stands for, but I know you use it.
It's the Texas Risk Assessment System, and it is validated and normed on the Texas population and published. So, and it is predictive, and it does well even with this population, which Amy knows a little bit about. I know you have that now. Yes. So anyway, the revocation process is pretty complex, but it escalates at different levels of seriousness. Things sometimes go immediately to court. Sometimes, if it's something more minor, we're going to be talking to you. We're going to be looking at a bit provider. We're going to be looking at different situations, maybe that we need to do an admonishment, or we need to pull somebody out and put them in jail and put them in a, in a lockdown treatment program somewhere. It just depends on what's happening with the case. But ultimately, we give the court a very clear picture of what's happening. The judge, by statute, has the authority to amend conditions. They can issue a warrant immediately, and that happens more than people think it does. A lot of times we'll ask for a warrant. My officers in the court talk to the prosecutors as well on what's going on cases. When we're looking at something concerning, we're moving on it, trying to get something going quickly. Once a warrant's issued, all of our information is documented, pushed to the DA, and the ADA is actually the individual that files the motion to revoke probation or motion to adjudicate. So not to get too complex, there's two kinds of probation. One is deferred adjudication, which people hear about, and that is actually the most common. A lot of folks think that is, not as harsh. It actually is, because if somebody violates deferred, the judge has the full range of punishment. So if the maximum sentence is 25 years for a case, they can send them to prison for the full 25 years if they violate deferred. And the burden of proof on a revocation is not like a trial, right? Where you go through all the evidence. It's, by a preponderance of the evidence. I'm not going to get too in the weeds because the DA probably needs to talk about that. But generally, it's pretty, if they violated, they violated. And it's, they'll have a hearing and the full range of sentencing is opening, and, they're going to prison. Straight probation, we don't see it as common with DV because it's not available. You guys, sorry, my dog is around barking in the background. But on those, it's a 10-year max sentence, and whatever's left is what they might get revoked for. But there's a hearing, once it's sent to court, once the DA steps in, it's pretty much in their hands on what happens from there. Does that make sense?
Totally. Now, I know this is kind of like this is going to be a trick question, but not really. So, so I know y'all used to have, and I'm sure you still do have a contact that if a victim needed to find out who a probation officer was, there's a contact person, but then also kind of like this is kind of like the tricky part in the double-edged sword. So like, we know that if somebody wants to report, like a victim wants to say, hey, somebody's doing something wrong on probation, then, they can contact the probation officer and give them that information. Now, on the flip side of that, if there is a victim that's on probation for some reason, and the batterer's using that as one of the controlling techniques, is saying, if you do this, then I'm going to tell your probation officer this. So like, what is the best? I mean, I guess the probation officer weighs the information that they get and does some investigation.
That's a great question. This is a long-standing, very challenging thing because, and it doesn't just happen in DV cases, but understandably in intimate partner violence, even family violence, generally, you can see all kinds of situations. See Yolanda shaking her head because I know they get the same kind of thing. You do have to figure out, is this just someone trying to retaliate or control? Or is this a true threat? And the officer actually, has to start investigating. And we see all kinds of situations. I mean, we certainly want to know, especially if a victim is afraid. We want that information to get to us. And I'll talk about, I know with as many officers as we have, sometimes it's very challenging, but certainly there's specific individuals that can be contacted. You can always call. They're going to get you hooked up, even if you call the main number. I even have people email us or message us on social media. How do I get a hold of probation officer X sometimes? But generally that information, we send out victim letters and notices. So generally they have that. We have victims assistance people that work in the department. So we are contacting them, as long as we have up-to-date information and we're keeping them apprised of, with the person's in jail, out of jail, what's going on. We have all kinds of situations. We will have a batterer come in and say, hey, I have a no contact condition. The victim is texting me every day, and what do? I don't want to go to jail. That's one situation that comes up. Obviously, we're going to look at the text messages. We're going to look at the whole situation and try to figure out what's going on. That does happen. And sometimes, that is the case. And, it may all end up back in front of the judge trying to sort out what's happening. And, they may also pull the state in to kind of help us out. If there is someone contacting a victim and threatening them, all of those are taken very seriously. So we're gonna talk to the victim. We're gonna try to figure out what's going on. We're gonna take that information. We're certainly gonna follow up. Experienced officers, especially those that have worked in the DV unit, are pretty good about understanding the situations, knowing what collateral records to look at, knowing how far to go, where to go with it. But Amy, we just have to basically follow everything that we look at and everything that comes in. And you do have to sort out. It's a very good question. Is this just retaliation, or is it, or a controlling factor? Because we know that happens, or is it truly there's a threat here? So we see it all over.
Great.
And I know I did mention, I know you specifically asked about, someone we may have on probation that's being threatened, by a batterer, right, as a means of control. The same thing applies there. We're gonna figure out how to work on that and how to sort that out. And our goal is, most of those situations, we have individuals that need a lot of help, and we're going to try to solve those problems. That's where community comes in really important to us as well. Sometimes we just need to get that victim in a safe place, whether they're on probation or not. And that's a critical piece. And we've done that. We've done that several times.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. May. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. May? Sarah?
I don't know if it's an observation or a question, or maybe a combination. Maybe it's a discussion, I guess. So for victims who have been in trouble with the law and they've got a criminal record, and yet they are legitimately being victimized, we have seen that has become a barrier in receiving victim services, because of a fear or a caution of, do we bring in a person with a known criminal background into a population of vulnerable other people? On our end, it's kind of tricky, because we have no issues transporting a person who's had a criminal background. The challenge comes in finding a domestic violence agency that is willing to accept that person and take them in. I'm curious to know if anyone else in this call has seen or experienced maybe that struggle, or has come across that before.
I can say that yes, that is a struggle. Sometimes, it's a barrier to getting them into shelter. We also know that it is a barrier as far as housing is concerned. I do know that if they are fleeing domestic violence, then there's a possibility, that they could be eligible for, rapid rehousing or something like that. But yes, that does get taken into consideration. And I know that there have been numerous times when we have had, since the coordinating council does do rapid rehousing, that we have had to pay a large deposit, really large, like the 3 or 4 times the rent deposit, just so that we can get them into a place. We also know we can also work with like individual landlords, because we don't only just place them in apartments, and we do have, so we can work with individual landlords, and there are some that will take them with an explanation.
Right.
So I think that working closely, if they are on probation, working closely with a probation officer, I think
Yeah.
helps. So
Yeah,
I think that's something we need to also think about, as calling in the probation officer and talking to them about it
I
as well.
agree. I mean, Amy and Sarah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was actually thinking about that while I was talking earlier. Is I wonder how many times they're worried because of the criminal history, and we want to help. So one thing I could say, on here, if sometimes the officer is going to have information, but you may need a higher level, you may need a clinician, you may need me. I don't know. If we need to staff a case, we want to work together on that. And because we'll know things. We look at jail behavior. We look at all kinds of different things when we're, we have to think about some of those things too, right? When we put people in residential treatment, whatever setting we're doing, we have to figure it out. Sometimes people have mental health problems, serious mental health problems, but they're also violent, and that has to get sorted out. But we're here to work on it. And yes, the officer hopefully can staff it. And if you need more help, I mean, Amy, I'm sure people have my email address. Even if you email me, you get a hold of me. If I can't get to you right away, somebody will.
And I can testify to that. That if she's not responding, somebody is.
Someone will.
Yeah. Because
we want the right thing to happen, and we need you guys just like helping us. So.
Well, great. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Yolanda now, but Dr. May, if you can hang out in case we have any more questions, that'd be great. So Yolanda is the assistant director at the region. Am I saying that right? Region 3 Parole, or Parole Region 3?
I wish I was the assistant director.
Okay. That's what Mona said.
It's years coming. I'm gonna claim that.
Yeah.
But I'm a unit supervisor here with Houston 7 District Parole Office, and I'm over the District Resource Center.
Okay. I like assistant director better, but go ahead. I'll promote you.
I actually made a PowerPoint that I wanted to share.
Okay.
If you guys are okay with that.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, look.
Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I think I see. Okay. As I stated before, I'm with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Parole Division, and I am one of the locations here in Region 3 at Houston 7, and they also have another one at Houston 1 that they have. And the things that I'm going to be going over today is what is the District Resource Center, who actually initiates the imposition of some special conditions for our District Resource Center. Going to go over how our clients are placed on our District Resource Center caseload and the eligibility criteria, and how long the DRC classes are and who facilitates them. Also, I'm going to go over who is considered successful completion from the DRC caseload and what's considered unsuccessful discharge from our caseload. I'm also going to go over some of the revocation process for you all, and some of the helpful answers to some questions, and then I'll take questions afterwards or throughout. The District Resource Center is a program designed to respond to the needs of our clients, organized, programming conducted within approved district resource offices. And I say that this is one of them, one of two. We provide programming such as anger management, cognitive skills, pre-employment preparation for classes. Usually that's done by our re-entry coordinator, who's also here. She actually had a class today. And but not all DRC clients on the caseload will be required to complete those programming. Only if they have those special conditions, they're required to complete those. Let's see, who's responsible for the imposition for our special conditions? As I stated before, the board and Court of Parole determines those special conditions. As soon as the clients, before they're actually released from prison, they're informed of what conditions through their certificate that they have been placed to abide by. So once we receive them, we go over it with them. We document that we went over it with them. They sign more paperwork regarding the specifications that they have to attend and have to abide by. So and that's very important, because in the event that they don't go to class and then we have to start the pre-revocation process because a warrant has been issued, we have that paperwork showing proof that we've informed them to go to these classes that they failed to go to. The client may be eligible for placement on our DRC caseload by the region director if requested and approved by the Board of Support and Parole. The anger management class is one of the classes we have here. It's taught by one of our facilitators, which is a parole officer here. The 0.20 is a batterer intervention prevention program, which is what Ms. May was talking about earlier. And it's done by an outside source or a third party. But what I've incorporated here is, since we have so many classes available, or so many rooms available, shall I say, we have one particular facilitator who comes here every week, or twice a week actually, to teach classes here. So it makes it a lot easier for the parole officers to touch bases with the BIP facilitator and finding out if the client is getting everything that they need to and participating within the class. So we also have the cognitive skills class that's also taught by a facilitator who's been trained here, who's also a parole officer. The parenting classes is also taught by an outside source, and we do have those referrals that we can send those clients who have those special conditions to. A lot of our clients also have the 0.48, which is the sorority participation sorority aftercare. So they had classes while they were in CID, which is the Correctional Institutional Division, and then after they get out, we complete it on our end so that they complete a certain number of classes, and then they can get off of that DRC caseload. And of course, the victim of stalking, which is V1, and then V2 for victims. More of the eligibility criteria initiated when the client comes into the office is they touch base with the parole officer. The parole officer goes over the information with them as far as the file material, how much assaultive offense history they have, the need for any type of vocational training or employment, any type of educational resources they need. They making sure that they get on it and they get them into those classes that they need to be into. We also look at the history of domestic violence, because if we get, say for instance, a client who came out and didn't have those special conditions that needed to be placed, or we felt like needed to be placed on a DRC caseload, such as anger management, or we see a lot of tension when we talk to them, or they are against going to AANA class, and it's just the way that they speak, we feel like, hey, I think this client needs anger management. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and submit that information off to the board, inform them of why we believe this client needs anger management, and then wait for them to approve or deny it, and then make sure that they attend class if approved. We also have the TREX here as well, which is the Texas Risk Assessment, and that determines the supervision level of the client. So that really helps out a lot in determining if the client have to come in once or twice. But just know that these clients who are on the DRC caseload, we're already seeing them once a week because they have to come to class. And those people who facilitate the classes are a DRC officer, which is their officer. So they're seeing them on a weekly basis, making sure that they're okay. So they could see if they have maybe any problems, if they're not talking right, they can find out what's going wrong, pull them to the side. Things to that effect really helps out a lot when you have a facilitator who's also your parole officer. Am I going too fast? Anybody have any questions?
I had one, what was it?
Yeah, I told you if you put it in the chat, you wouldn't forget it.
Thank you. What's the number 7? And I can't say that word. What does that mean?
Number 7?
That, yeah, the criminogenic, what does that mean?
It's just like their ability to be able to, the crime, how they're gonna How do we feel about the crimes that they committed? How they might commit another crime. So we take a look at that through TREX. That's one of the categories within our TREX assessment that helps us determine the level that they need to be on. Most of them really come off high initially, especially for District Resource Center. And then a month later, we have to take a month to 3 months later, we take another TREX. And then that determines their supervision level, if it's high, low, or low mod.
So okay, so these people come in once a week. How long is this last that they have to come in once a week? And these are for the people that just got out, right? Just got out of prison.
Right.
So, and then, so how long do they have to be on this level of supervision?
They have to, well, it depends. TREX normally is done depending on if they come out low or high or low mod. If they're coming out low, it's going to be done once a year. Initially, once a year. When they first come out, we're doing a little short one that's giving you just a tad bit of information. That's going to determine if they're low or over anything above low. If they say they high, we do an additional assessment, which is a more extensive background about all of the things that they've done in the past. So if that one turns out low mod, low, or high, it's going to be on a yearly basis. So in this caseload, they could stay on the caseload from, because the classes range from 12 weeks and they have to take from 2 to 3 classes. If they have an anger management or BIP special condition, they have to attend a victim impact panel and a cognitive skills class. So that's 2 12 weeks plus another week after that. So that's about 24, 25 weeks total. And then we have to kind of, it depends on how our classes fall as well, because we don't want to overload the client and put them in 2 classes at the same time. We try to get them to take 1 completion, take another completion, and then we'll see if they could go ahead and get removed off of our caseload. I was just going over the weeks that our cognitive skills is 12 weeks long. Our victim impact panel is a 2-day class. It's 2 hours once per week, and it's taught by our facilitator, who's also a parole officer, as well as the anger management class. And the BIP, our BIP instructor, he teaches it here at the office as well. And he teaches 2 classes here every week. And he charges the clients $10. They're not going to find that everywhere, because I noticed that a lot of BIP facilitators charge $25, $30, $40 per class, which is once per week. That's a lot for anybody to have to pay. So that's very good for them as well. Let's see. And these are approved volunteers. The BIP facilitators are approved volunteers of TDCJ. And I'll also put the link here if anybody wanted to take a look at it to see all of the facilitators that we currently have. The DRC caseload completion, successful completion, that's the BIP class, not BIP, where it actually is the BIP, cognitive skills, and the victim impact panel. Those have to be completed and staffed for them to be successfully completed off the DRC caseload. So if they're not in compliance, we're not taking them off the DRC caseload. Once they're in compliance and we could say, okay, I think he'll do fine or she'll do fine on a regular caseload, then we'll go ahead and place them on a regular caseload once completed. Unsuccessful completion of our DRC class is when the client absconds from supervision or picks up a new charge. If they pick up a new charge, then we have to start the pre-revocation process. If they abscond and we don't know where they at, then he or she is gonna have a warrant until they are found. If the client is incarcerated, of course, if they're attending or in SafeP, which is a substance abuse facility, or ISF in the intermediate sanction facility. If once they complete the intermediate sanction facility or safe P, they will still have to complete all the DROC required classes. It doesn't go away. So I don't know if they believe it's gonna go away, but it doesn't go away. If our clients miss 3 classes and they're unsuccessfully discharged, we can and issue a warrant for their arrest. Now, if they miss that first additional class, we're on it because we have to complete what we call a rapid response. If they miss class, that next day we're contacting them, bringing them into the office, finding out what's going on, what happened, was it something medical wise? Did you just forget? We do have to write them up unless it's medical, but they have to let us know something ahead of time. And then we completely keep going with the progression phase if they continue to miss classes up until that 3rd missed class. In our pre-revocation process, if the client is arrested, the first thing that the parole officer is going to do have to go interview them. So they go interview them, have the client sign off on their forms on if they picked up a charge or if they had a no charge or it was just a technical violation. A hearing date is set, or if it's waived, then it's submitted to the board for review. The client is provided with the hearing packet, the witnesses. Now, if they're a victim in the case, they can attend the hearing. We tell them that it's best for them to attend the hearing to give their side of the story. If they're kind of giving us some pushback about going, what we do is tell them, fill out an affidavit. An affidavit can also be submitted into evidence so that you can at least tell them what occurred. It won't just be one-sided. So that's tending to work a lot better. And then due to COVID, a lot of our stuff have changed because we used to have in-person hearings, and now we're going to Zoom for almost everything. So that tends to help our victims say, okay, yeah, I'll attend. Do I have to have contact with them? They're a little bit more, they tend to want to be here as opposed to having to see them right in front of them. It makes them feel a lot safer. The process, it could take from 1 to 2 months or 2 years, more than that, depending on the circumstances of the case. If the client has a pending charge, it could take a long time due to the fact of those hearings being pushed back consistently. If they just have a technical violation, then usually that's a 1 to 3 month process because we're trying to go ahead and resolve what was, the revocation. That doesn't take very long at all. The board importance of parole makes the determining factor revoke ISF or continue supervision. We do get the recommendation. We do recommend the parole officer and the hearing officer. We could give a recommendation, but at the end of the day, the board of pardons and parole had a last say. They let us know what they decide to do, and then we present it to the client.
So if, say, for instance, an offender client, whatever you want to call them, probation or offender. So anyway, if the client picks up a new charge, do you wait until that charge is disposed of before you do the revocation, or would you do the revocation while that charge is still pending, given the fact that there's such a long wait here in Harris County? And is he or she going to stay in custody pending the outcome of the hearing?
Yes, ma'am. We do initially a preliminary hearing process. Once the board of pardons decide that there's enough evidence to move forward with the case, we wait until Harris County has disposed of the case, or adjudicated the case before they're released. If the client at some point in time discharges, it could be staffed, whether or not they wanted to proceed or whether or not the client could be released. So everything would have to be staffed. So we do have those instances when things happen, such as that, if they discharge while in jail, but it's not very often because we don't have a long list of clients in jail now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Some of the questions that I also wanted to answer was, how does the agency and department get involved with domestic violence cases? Initially, at the start of their parole, when they come to the parole office, we're on it. If they're on the DRC caseload and they're placed on the DRC under officer, we telling them when they first get here, the ands, ifs, buts, everything about parole. So they're gonna be notified, and we make sure that if they miss a class, we're on it, that rapid response, we have to conduct it. It's kind of like a SISP, a super intensive supervision. So we kind of have to act fast. You know, we don't want nothing to happen to anybody, especially with some of these clients. Well, a lot of these clients who we get have that assaultive type offense in the past. So we want to make sure that we're on top of these cases. How does that involve and impact our offenders and the safety of our victim? What usually happens is if we do have accessibility to the victim, our parole officers always make sure to communicate with them, let them know, hey, this is my cell phone number. If you have any problems with Jane Doe or whoever the case may be, make sure you give me a call. This makes them feel a little bit more secure about, you know, having that accessibility to the parole officer, you know, because we can see if something is going on, and it's just easier for them to be able to contact us and let us know, so we can nip it in the bud and contact the client, for them not to have any contact and move forward with whatever we have to do with the client.
Now, this is the same question I asked Dr. May. Is there some, how, if we're working with a victim, how can we get who that person's parole officer is to get to contact, to connect the victim and that parole officer, especially if they're having a difficult time with their partner?
They can contact any parole office. If they know the client's name, they can look him up and give them the name of the parole officer and the phone number to the office.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Also, what is working in terms of victim safety and offender accountability? Our process seems to work very smoothly, only because we, like I said, we nip it in the bud as soon as it happened, because we don't want nobody getting hurt. We don't want that, you know, that time frame. Anything could happen. And if we would have communicated, you know, in a timely manner, we could resolve something from happening. So it's that accountability, and then holding the client accountable to make sure they're going to class, making sure they're not missing class. And when they are missing class, they're in this office. So that makes them want to say, I can't miss class, I can't miss class. So they're more concerned about what they're doing than what anybody else is doing. That keeps them on track. So they're reintegrating into society in a positive manner, as opposed to doing their old ways. And then I'm open for questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, I think you did great. Now, I know that we've been talking about the TRES, and so I was wondering, Dr. May, or if you had some information on what exactly is on the TRES and what does that all include? Because I think, I mean, you know, there's so many different risk assessments out there. I'm just like wondering, like, and since y'all both use TRES, I was just wondering if either one of y'all had something that we could kind of talk about with that.
Sure.
Oh, wait, you muted yourself, Dr. May.
I have my TRES all here.
Oh, okay.
I thought Yolanda was trying to run away from the question.
No.
If I can share my screen, I actually have the domains and can talk about it for a minute if you guys want me to.
You should be able to share your screen, Dr. May.
Okay.
All right. And let's just make sure that I can actually do that cognitive. All right. So let me go on.
So I have a question while you're doing that. If somebody comes out of jail and they did on their, so can somebody come out of jail and go on parole and then be on probation And if they can, do y'all use the same TRAS that they used when they left one and entered the other?
Okay, so I'm sorry. Are you talking about getting a new offense and they're already on parole, or?
So if somebody comes out of jail, they go on parole. When they get off parole, do they then go on probation?
Okay, so for probation, it's different, right? Jail is generally when there's a case pending. Now, it could be a parole violation. Yolanda gets them when they're coming out of a prison sentence, right? So they're going to TDC. So probation doesn't have that case.
Okay,
She gets them, they get sentenced to serve an X amount of time, and then Yolanda gets the case at that point. On probation, that's something that the court does to resolve the case. So in lieu of, a 25-year sentence to prison, you're going to get placed on deferred adjudication for X number of years. And if you violate, then they're going to prison. Does that make sense? So they generally go from jail to probation.
so it would be the other way. Okay, so then would Yolanda have the same TRAS that y'all had on them?
There should be a mechanism to share that information, which was the intent of the whole system. And I do believe some of that gets sent in a pin packet. I don't know how much parole gets. However, we certainly can converse. And there are times where we will share a client, right? They're on parole and they're on probation. That does happen. And we have to reach out to the probation or the parole officer. Now, the information, which is the question you're actually asking, is absolutely excellent, because it's good information for either one of us to know. There is a point, where maybe the TRAS that we did is so old that it doesn't make sense anymore. Because remember, they're going to have criminal history, they're going to have collateral records, they're going to have all kinds of other documentation. But generally, that is something that can be shared. It's not always done as a rule. It just depends on the circumstances.
Okay,
It is the same pool on the supervision
okay.
side. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
And they could score differently at different times in their
Yes.
life, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, so when you look at a risk assessment, and these are solid instruments in terms of measuring what we need them to measure, and also giving us a good sense of who we need to be worried about. It is not the only information we look at. Let me be clear about that. But it's certainly important information, because sometimes you might get a first time, and I do have that. I have people that don't really have a criminal history, and they end up scoring high risk on my risk assessment. And the reason they do is, they have problems in multiple areas. So we've been talking about criminogenic factors, and I'm going to show you those in a minute. Those are actually the individual areas we measure that make up the full-blown risk score. And some of those factors are dynamic, which means there's something we can do about it, right? Attitude is one of the criminogenic risk factors. Let me actually just pop that up real quick on the screen. Can y'all see this?
Yep.
These are the domains. This is actually what a court may get from us, or what comes out on it. So first, we're going to know, what somebody scored on the overall risk factor. So all of their scores on each of these domains get consolidated into an overall risk score. And so I have an example up here of someone that scored high risk, which means we're concerned about, based on the data, and I'll show you that in a minute, 5 in 10 of them are at risk for reoffending. That's somebody we're going to be worried about. We're going to focus on. Okay. And when you get to the very high range, it can even get more serious than that in terms of risk. This particular offender, what you're going to do is you're going to look at what are the problem areas. What did they score high in? And, it's color coded. Y'all can probably already figure out the color coded scheme. The judges love the color coding, by the way, not that, it helps, right? At a glance, they can pretty well see. I'm seeing orange or red, I'm worried. So this particular person, you know, they have a lot of problems with peers. They're hanging out with the wrong people. They don't have pro-social influence. They're involved in, you know, gang activity, some organized crime. We're concerned about that. And they're scoring high on peers. That's a problem. And if they keep doing that, that's making them at risk to reoffend. They have attitude issues that support criminality. And I'll show you what some of those items are in a second. You know, they have education and employment problems, which means, you know, they're not in a good place. They don't have a GED. They didn't finish high school. They struggled with employment. It's been unstable. Family, there are problems going on in their relationships, and it hits on a variety of different instances. You know, there's other concerns. They also have a criminal history. So those are things that are going to tell me, you know, it gets me going on what I need to focus on with the particular person. And you're going to drill down from there if you're us. So when Yolanda's talking about targeting criminogenic domains, anybody that's scoring in moderate to high, anything that's not low, you're concerned about. You know, you're going to have a plan. You're going to have to target it. Now, keep in mind, and I'll show you this really quickly. I mean, we're going to go way beyond just the TREX. This is just the first step. It's going to tell me a lot about what I do, but I'm going to drill in. There's a whole host of trailers, including domestic violence trailers, where we're going to look, you know, more specifically at other areas as well, you know, that are going to give us a good direction on what to go. This is, it's just a sort of snippet, but if you look at a risk assessment, what you want to see is, I don't know how much y'all know about risk assessments, but you're looking at, if I score, the higher the score, the more likely someone is at risk of recidivating. And when you validate a risk assessment, what you do is you administer that instrument on, you know, a big number of people, and then you follow up later on down the road to see if they were rearrested, right, and committed a new offense. And you look to see if your score actually predicted whether or not they were going to be rearrested, how well you did. And what you want to see is what we have here. Is when we do the validation, I can send you guys, I'm probably getting way too in the weeds. Amy's about to slap me, I bet you. Anyway, you want to see a stair step. You know, you want to see the higher they score, the more likely they're at risk. And this is generally kind of how it falls out. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. But if anybody wants to follow up with questions, I have them. Real quick, Amy, don't kill me. I know we're running over time. These are just some general ideas of what's behind the domains measures. So attitudes, you know, if they have beliefs that support crime and committing crime, tend to rely on violence to solve problems, they don't solve problems well, risk taking, those are things we're looking at. It just kind of gives you a you know, kind of a decent perspective. Criminal peers, they have a lot more people involved in criminal activity that they hang out with than pro-social. That's a problem. Obviously, if they're involved in organized or criminal networks, gangs, criminal activities, you know, those are things that are going to score them out there. Family, you know, you're looking at level of support, you're looking at stability, you're looking at connection to others. You know, that just, hopefully that gives you some sense of an idea of what those factors are. And I can stop sharing that now, but that's just a snapshot. That's the short version, y'all, believe it or not.
No, I think that was interesting because I mean, that was interesting to see, you know, like our risk assessments are like on the, like, you know, on the danger for the survivor. And it's interesting to see what y'all are looking at as well. And they do, I mean, as they do kind of, you know, intersect one another. So I think it's very interesting.
They do. And this, you know, we, as Amy mentioned, we're doing research. I didn't get too far into it, but we know for a fact that if they score higher domestic violence, it does a pretty good job of predicting for DV clients as well. You do want to drill down, you know, especially on intimate partner violence, looking at things like stalking, you know, strangulation, weapons, those sorts of things, escalation, controlling behaviors. where you can get more specific on what kind of monitoring, what kind of things you need to be worried about. But it's a good instrument, because I will tell you guys, we do find things, where someone was just looking at criminal history and offense, they may not look high risk. But when we get that, all the information together, score them out, they're high risk because of some of these factors and domains that I'm showing you. And it can change over time. Pretty much everything in there is dynamic, right? It can change other than criminal history.
Thank you, Dr. May, for sharing that. That's great. And Yolanda, for all your information as well. And I think what I think we can take away from this is that, and I think it's something that we didn't know, that we as victim service providers can provide the victim with information about how to get in touch with either the parole officer or the probation officer, and that they will listen. I mean, I know when I worked at the DA's office, when I worked with victims, I would always give them the probation officer's information and just tell them to call.
Yeah.
Because instead of being just a faceless person, you have a name, a number, and a voice.
Absolutely.
And we've heard that, and then they become real. I mean, because as we all know, and especially between y'all, that there's just so many, y'all have so many people that you're dealing with. And so anything that can make at least somebody stick out was like, oh, wait, I
Yes.
remember talking to that victim, I think is great. So I think that's something we can all take with us to know that, hey, we can get that information and get it out to them, because I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Don't
Um,
ever hesitate to call. And, sometimes the officers change. We all have turnover. But, if your contact, if you can definitely direct the victim, like I said, even, to me or Amy, some of our leaders that have been meeting with you guys regularly, we're going to follow up. We'll get a hold of them. And the officers do want to engage. They're specially trained, the DB unit in particular, but we want to know what's going on and want to help.
That's right. And Miss Leday, don't think you're getting out of this either, because now that I have your email address, I know how to get hold of you. So yeah, that might not be the best thing to do, but yeah. So does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? I know a lot of us have tomorrow off and everyone's ready to get out of here early. So, but anyway, but thank you so much, Dr. May and Ms. Leday. Y'all were fantastic. This was a lot of information. And I'm sorry that we didn't have a bigger turnout, because I think it was fantastic. But we are going to put the recording up so that people can see it. And I know we are going to reference this and some stuff about, hey, come and listen, because I think this was very much needed information. So, and I think everybody that works with the victim that has any ties to probation or parole should listen to this. I think it's fantastic. So thank you guys very much. I learned a lot. And so, so thank you. And I appreciate it. And and Tisha, do you have anything else? Any announcements? Anybody have any announcements? Anything?
No, just thank you once again, Dr. May and Ms. Leday. That was very good. So I'll even go back and watch the replay.
I have to get what I
thank you
meant.
for having
It's a
us.
nice resource.